Welcome to Asian Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. Our show today, China flexes, America pushes back. And my guest today is Ms. Shirley Kan, who is a highly respected specialist on Asian Security Affairs and who just retired after 25 years of service with the Congressional Research Service, where she specialized in Asian Security Affairs. She received her BA degree from Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, where she graduated cum laude, and then went on to the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor for her master's degree. And I think most of the folks know that the University of Michigan is a great place to study about China. Welcome to Asian Review. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Bill.
You're very, very welcome. Well, before we get into it, let's talk a little bit about the Congressional Research Service. Maybe give the viewers just an idea of what it does and what your role in the Congressional Research Service was.
Sure. The Congressional Research Service, or CRS for short, is a small agency that works exclusively for Congress. So yes, it is part of the federal government, but it is in the legislative branch. So many people have heard of our sister agencies, the GAO, and also the smaller one, CBO. We are the third one, CRS. And I like to think of us as the Goldilocks. We are not too small like CBO, and we're not too big like GAO. So our role is to work exclusively for Congress. The function is actually rather serious, to provide Congress with information and analysis that is objective and nonpartisan. In other words, the Congress cannot rely solely on the President of the United States to provide its information, because the Congress has its own role that is co-equal with the President of the United States under the Constitution, whereas the President is merely concerned about his or her own agenda.
Interesting. So when you do your analysis, when you were at the CRS and doing your analysis, did you use a lot of computer programming or modeling, or is it basically textual research?
It would be considered all source, would be reading a lot of what is written out there, reports, news articles, all kinds of information based on our contacts, our own analysis, our own assessments.
And the Congressional Research Service, this might sound a little bit of like a strange question, but it does have access to classified information.
Yes, some of us would have that. It is on an individual basis, yes.
I see.
Yes.
That's great. That's great. So you could, if you were lucky enough, you could have access to information coming from all kinds of other various organizations in the U.S. government.
Yes, in general, yes.
Oh, good. Interesting. Okay, well, let's move on then. The rebalance, of course, everybody talks about the rebalance these days, and that's a pretty hot issue. Where do we stand? Where does the U.S. stand on the rebalance?
That's an interesting question, since it's been, a number of years since the Secretary of State announced it actually here in Honolulu in a speech. And she announced this about, almost 4 years ago, about paying more attention to the Asia-Pacific region. And it has been termed the strategic rebalance. The term has been confusing to some people, especially outside of the United States. Basically, it is about changing the balance in our attention to different parts of the world, so that we are not dominated by one particular region, and that we can shift our resources, our attention, our priorities more to the Asia-Pacific region in terms of our posture, our presence, our priorities. The second thing I would like to note is the rebalance is real. A lot of people question whether we are really doing that, particularly because of the continuing threats in the Middle East. But it is a misconception to think that we would be withdrawing from any one part of the region of the world to focus on another part of the region, another region of the world, because we need to pay attention to all regions of the world. So there's been criticism that the rebalance is misleading to make people think that we had once left the Asia Pacific, or that we're now re-entering, or that we would leave the Middle East. To me, it's not a question of withdrawing or re-entering any one region. We never left any region of the world. We continue to be a Pacific power. We continue to have interests in the Middle East and other parts of the world. So one is that it is a matter of increasing the balance of our attention and resources. Two, it is the rebalance is real. But one way to think about it is, what is new? What's new about it? If we've never really left the Asia Pacific region, we continue to be a Pacific power, then what's new about it? And I think a helpful way of thinking about it is, previously under the Bush administration, there was a lot of attention paid to Northeast Asia, particularly the North Korean threat and to the challenges from the PRC. Now I think there's more balanced attention to other parts of Asia, to Southeast Asia especially, to ASEAN, and to even other parts of the Asia Pacific that we might not have had as much attention in the past. So it's even more of a balanced attention within the broad Asia Pacific region.
That's a very interesting point, because I don't think a lot of people realize that it's, when we say rebalance, it doesn't necessarily mean from one region of the world to another part of the world. It's sort of a rebalancing within Asia of American assets, American resources, and ramping them up a bit.
So now what's the question? To me, the issue today is that it is even more urgent to implement the strategic rebalance. We've laid out the policy, we've laid out the strategy, and it is real, but we need more urgency to implement it. And just as 150 years ago, we had Lincoln's victory with General Grant, I think we need to renew those lessons learned, that momentum matters and leadership matters. So there's even more urgency now as we're seeing the increasing challenges from China and other parts of Asia, particularly the continuing and increasing threat from North Korea. It is even more urgent to implement the strategy and implement it in a way that is a whole of government approach, because it was never meant to be simply a defense-oriented policy. We also need the diplomatic parts and the economic parts of the strategy.
Interesting that you mentioned the economic part, because no, I know you're a security specialist, but I'll just broadly introduce this question, TPP. And this is supposed to be one of President Obama's signature policies, at least by the time he goes out of office, and he'd like to be thought of as the Pacific president. But TPP's had a lot of trouble, and it's only on a second round, a second attempt at the House of Representatives that TPA got passed. People are suggesting, well, probably we'll get TPP, but it's not absolutely sure. If the U.S. doesn't get TPP, how is that going to impact, from a strategic perspective, how would that impact the rebalance?
A lot of people have said that TPP is a key component of the strategic rebalance, because we need to get the economic piece of it moving forward to have implementation. Secondly, what is the objective of the strategy? The objective of the strategy is to maintain U.S. leadership and credibility in the maintenance of the international system of rules and norms that are for the interests of all countries, including the United States. And if that is the objective, the United States needs to step up and show the leadership. And rather than maintaining this current system from which many nations benefit, we could have a different system of rules and norms that are not led by the United States and other Western-oriented countries with like-minded values and adherence to international laws.
Mm-hmm.
So from a strategic point of view, it is really important to have a trading system by which all nations adhere to the rules and norms that benefit all countries, rather than only a certain few.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a strategic imperative for many countries, and that's why they are very eager to take part in TPP. And even countries that have not been in the first round of the talks, such as Taiwan, have considered whether or not it is a strategic imperative or a strategic blunder to be left out of the TPP talks.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you brought up about Taiwan. It seems to me that as I hear voices coming out of Taiwan these days, they really want to be in it, in TPP. And they realize that probably that their best shot is on a second round of negotiation. Would you concur with it?
Actually, I am not as certain as you are.
Okay.
I am not as certain that Taiwan has taken all of the necessary steps.
That part, I see what you're saying, I agree with you.
In order to show that it is serious.
We're talking about opening its doors more, tearing down walls of protectionism, that sort of thing.
We're talking about regaining trust as a reliable trading partner, and that will adhere to international standards, particularly about U.S. agricultural exports, namely beef and pork.
Right.
So back to the rebalance. Another way that we could look at it is, what is the focus? What should be the focus? And if the United States is serious about the threats coming out of North Korea, I think there needs to be a lot more attention paid to how to deal with that threat. And I know there are a lot of debates, a lot of people have different ideas, but the threat is there, it is increasing, and we need to look at China's role in enabling that threat.
That's a really good point, and we're going to take a break here. We're going to come back with that and talk about China's enabling in North Korea, because I think that's really something we should dig into a little bit more. You're watching Asian Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Ms. Shirley Kan. She recently retired from the Congressional Research Service, and she's a highly respected figure on Asian security affairs, and we're very lucky to have her with us here right in our studio. And we'll be right back.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Keith.
My name's Keith Bettinger.
I knew that.
And I'm the host of ThinkTech Asia.
I knew that too.
Here on ThinkTech.
Fabulous. You got a great show going, Keith.
Thank you very much. And for our viewers out there that are interested in ThinkTech Asia, it airs every Tuesday from 4 to 4:45, and it can be accessed online at thinktech.com.
Yeah, so what kind of guests you like?
Well, we have a number of guests from academia, from practitioners of international affairs. Sometimes we have military officials. Sometimes we have public officials on the show. And our goal, we try to talk about current issues in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Central Asia, all throughout the Asian realm in more depth than you would find in traditional mainstream
That's the
media.
difference, isn't it?
Exactly.
That you're reaching out beyond what ordinary news media would do.
Right.
That's why we like you so much.
We're trying to provide a thinking person's perspective, an intelligent perspective on what's going on, and we're both sides of the story, or even when there's more than two sides, we try to cover every angle. And I think that's one of the big benefits that we provide here at ThinkTech, is it's a really innovative source of educational programming for the people of Hawaii.
You're great, Keith. You are a great host. You got a great show going on. I watch it every week.
Thanks very much.
Why don't you guys watch it every week too, okay?
4:45 to 4 to 4:45 every Tuesday.
Welcome back to Asian Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is Ms. Shirley Kan, who recently retired from the Congressional Research Service. Her specialty there was Asian Security Affairs. And that's exactly what we've been talking about just before the break. Just before the break, we were about to get into how China is enabling North Korea to be, should we say, the menace that it is. And let's pick it up from there. How does China enable North Korea to be a menace?
I think there's been really high hopes for the regime in China to change its policy about how it supports the regime and supports programs in North Korea. But I think it's been a big disappointment that there has not been a fundamental change in China's policy towards North Korea. Meanwhile, North Korea continues to be a missile and nuclear threat to the United States and our allies, including South Korea and Japan and other countries. It is not only a threat with its nuclear program, it is also a threat as a proliferator of weapons technology around the world, including to the Middle East. Now we have come to a crux in our decision making, and one of these decisions we have to make is whether to renew a nuclear cooperation agreement with China. It is commonly called the 123 agreement or 123 agreement. And I think it is time for us to seriously consider not renewing this nuclear cooperation agreement
How
with
does
China.
what's this agreement seek to do, the 123 agreement?
It is an agreement we already have with China. It was actually signed way back when Reagan was the president. And it has only been implemented recently. But now it is up for renewal. And given that China's non-proliferation policies really have not been as up to the standards that we and the international community expects, it is time to seriously consider whether or not we should just automatically renew this nuclear cooperation agreement.
But what does it seek to do? Share research?
No,
or
it's in terms of nuclear energy, it's a purely peaceful nuclear cooperation.
Civilian.
Civilian and, of course, and peaceful, supposedly, in terms of nuclear energy cooperation. And then back to the rebalance.
Sure.
An important part of the rebalance, if we're going to show that it is real and that we've got something to show for the implementation, some of interest to people right here in Hawaii would be the strategic buildup on the U.S. territory of Guam.
Okay.
And Hawaii would have a major piece in the buildup and interest in the buildup. It was almost 1 year ago that the Department of Defense submitted to Congress a master plan for the buildup on Guam. It was to satisfy one of the conditions for legislation to release the funds that are going to be used for the buildup. Not only funds of the United States government, but also funds committed by Japan, our important ally. So it is real money, and it's
Let me
coming
jump in
from
there. The
Japan.
Japan part was to help relocate U.S. Marines from Okinawa to Guam?
Correct.
And to
And
help
so-
defray the finances
Right.
for that?
Right. And now there's going to be further disbursement of the forces. Some of them will also come to Hawaii, to Kaneohe. And we're talking about approval in legislation now of up to $8.7 billion for the implementation for about 124 projects that could be carried out through fiscal year 2028.
These would be like construction jobs, basically. I mean, to ramp up the infrastructure of Guam so we could accommodate this influx of troops.
For defense, for deployment, there could be all kinds of projects that would be related to the Marines moving there for their operational readiness, for training, etc. And this would also help to strengthen the alliance with one of our most important allies, and that is Japan.
Japan. There was talk that the U.S. wanted to ramp up its facilities at Guam because it wanted to dock a second carrier there. Is that talk still going on? Or I haven't heard anything about that lately.
No, the decision was not to homeport. It was not to homeport a carrier there. And also there's another option to have a berth built, but that has also been indefinitely put off. Nonetheless, it is an important joint base for our refueling, for munition stocks, etc. So it is a hub. It is considered an important strategic hub for the U.S. buildup. And it's also very important, while Hawaii is already in the middle of the Pacific, Guam is even further west of Hawaii, and so it is even closer to the regional hotspots. and to our allies, such as the Philippines and Japan and South Korea.
I remember during the Vietnam War, a lot of bombing raids were carried out from Guam. Because, as you say, because of its proximity to Asia. Let me throw this question at you. We're building bases, at least we don't call them bases, in the Philippines. We call them, we use some other word, I'm not sure what it is, outpost or observation post or something, but I mean, it is true, isn't it, that we do have some small-scale bases that we're building on Palawan?
I'm not sure we're, you know, like you said, we're not calling bases. Those days of having Subic and Clark are over.
Mm-hmm.
But there has been increased cooperation because the Philippines is one of the treaty allies of the United States,
Mm-hmm.
and it's important for training purposes. Previously, there was a lot of training for counterterrorism,
Mm-hmm.
and there's also training for maritime security. The United States has options to help the Philippines because it is an important part to maintain the credibility of the alliance.
Interesting. I just will just have to keep our eyes on that. I mean, bases in the Philippines is always a very sensitive issue, and it seems to me to be a real dichotomy in Filipino public opinion. There's some people that really want bases there, and then there's some bad feelings left over from the old days. Let's move on to mill, because, you know, that's such a hot issue, it seems to me. It's always talked about. I hear about it endlessly. Oh, we need more mill-to-mill relations between the United States military and the Chinese military. But, you know, I'll put myself on record here. I'm skeptical about it. I'm really having trouble seeing what it's achieving. And it seems to me the U.S. throws its doors open wider to China than China does to the U.S. And I don't know, what's your take on that?
Well, I am also skeptical about whether what you're talking about, the military to military engagement that we have with the People's Republic of China. Its military is collectively called the People's Liberation Army, PLA for short.
Right.
But it does not refer only to the ground forces, but to the whole military collectively. So our military to military engagement with the PLA is something that is very contentious and very sensitive. If we're talking about strategy, we're talking about what are our objectives. And if our objectives, as stated in the Defense Secretary's reports to Congress, are to encourage a rising China to adhere to international norms and standards and international law, as well as for a maintenance, for a force that is sustaining stability in the region, then I'm not sure that we are achieving those objectives. And those objectives are, of course, also the goals of PACOM here in Honolulu. Now, just in...
Let me interrupt a second. For the benefit of our viewers, many of us mentioned that PACOM is the U.S. Pacific Command, the largest military command in the world. It covers essentially everything from Hawaii west to India. It's a huge command. Hopefully in the future, Admiral Harris will be joining us on the show. This is a parenthetical note. He's promised to do that. We just need to set a date. I'll let you
Yeah,
go on.
and speaking of Admiral Harris, he was just on the record as saying that the United States has the option to withdraw the invitation to the PLA Navy to the next Rim of the Pacific, or RIMPAC, exercise based here in Hawaii next year. He is on the record. Admiral Harris just took over command of the Pacific Command, and he publicly said that we certainly have the option to withdraw that invitation. And I was wholly supportive. Just in April, in Washington, in Congress, there was a fairly senior Defense Department official who said that the Pentagon is looking to double down on its mill-to-mill engagement with the PLA.
You know, that's an important point. What does he mean by double down? You mean be less open, be more open? You got me with that term, double down, and I think that's a real important one. I want to make sure I understand, and I want to make sure everybody in the audience understands where we're going here.
So this official, and I didn't say it's a he,
Okay.
this official said the Department of Defense is looking at doubling down on its mill-to-mill engagement with the PLA, meaning even increasing the momentum to expand contacts. And there are lots of options for what we could be doing. There are many, many other areas of contacts that we might be getting into that we have not been. But if we're going to use the same gaming analogy, then I would say just like in Vegas, we have to be ready to walk away.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. I remember when there was the RIMPAC, when was it, last year? Still when Admiral Locklear was here. And the U.S. was very, very happy that China was participating. And then they were a little bit annoyed when they found out there was a Chinese spy ship kind of tracking the RIMPAC activity. And it seems to me the U.S. tried to be very philosophical about it. At least that's what was said in the press. I'm not sure what the word was in Washington on that.
Well, China was invited to send 4 ships. It sent a destroyer, frigate, an oiler, and a hospital ship. Those 4 ships were invited. And what was really remarkable was that even though the PLA Navy was invited to participate for the first time in RIMPAC, not just observe, but participate, it was invited in. It still sent an intelligence collection ship that was not invited.
That's a nicer
Now,
way to say spy ship. Okay.
It was, and so here you are invited to participate, and yet you do something where you send an intelligence collection ship. Now, when you talk about the United States being philosophical, the United States was merely stating principles of international law. This is nothing unique to the United States. So we pointed out that that particular ship that was not invited remained outside the territorial waters of the United States, meaning outside of the territorial waters of Hawaii, surrounding Hawaii. Therefore, we're stating the international principle that it is perfectly acceptable under international law. The United States is not going to object to a ship that did not enter into the territorial waters of Hawaii. And by the same token, China has no right to object when ships from any country are sailing near China, as long as other ships do not enter into the territorial waters of China, just as China remains outside the territorial waters of both Hawaii and Guam, which belong to the United States.
Let's continue that when we come back. We need to take another break here. You're watching Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. We're having a really interesting conversation here with Ms. Shirley Kan, Asian Security Specialist, who just retired after 25 years of service with the Congressional Research Service. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on ThinkTech Hawaii. Center Stage airs every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and of course you can check out our archives on YouTube or on ThinkTech Hawaii anytime you like. Why should you do that? Because this is an arts show that I believe is making a difference in lives. We talk with artists of various ilk. We talk with painters and writers, playwrights, novelists, poets, sculptors, dancers, you name it, directors, actors, of course. And we don't only talk about what people do, but we talk about how they do it. And my favorite part of the conversation, we talk about why they do it. And it's really common on this show to hear people say, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And it's very common to hear people afterwards who have seen the show say the same thing. And I hear all the time that people are inspired by the conversations that we have. So why don't you join us and be inspired too? That's Center Stage on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. We'll see you Center Stage.
Welcome back to Asian Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. We're having a really interesting discussion on China, and we were talking about mill-to-mill relations. I think we pretty well covered that. We want to go on and talk about Taiwan now. And Okay, well, let's talk about the Taiwan military. What would you say its strengths are? What would you say its weaknesses are?
Ooh, you asked the tough questions right at the get-go.
Right at the front, yeah.
Right at the front. Taiwan has a lot of strengths. By virtue of one fact that cannot be changed, and that's the geography. Taiwan is a massive island, 100 miles off the coast. So Taiwan has a lot of strengths. And I recently visited Normandy last year, and if you recall, it was the 70th anniversary of D-Day. And if you recall, D-Day was a massive, massive challenge for
Right.
U.S. and Allied forces
Right.
by virtue of the defensive advantages on the coast of France. By the same virtue, Taiwan has a lot of defensive advantages that it can make use of. Taiwan also has an advanced economy, especially in the IT, information technology industry, that Taiwan could leverage for cybersecurity, for other aspects of more advanced systems. Taiwan also has the benefit of being the recipient of advanced weapon systems from the United States. The disadvantages for Taiwan are, one, right now, the Obama administration has been too hesitant to release weapon systems and make them available to Taiwan as called for under U.S. law, which is the Taiwan Relations Act.
Let me stick a question in here. You know, the U.S., you say the Obama administration has been too hesitant or resistant to selling advanced weapon systems to Taiwan. Is that a decision that's mainly come from Evan Medeiros, who recently departed the National Security Council?
I would just say that's a valid question, but I don't want to get into certain personalities.
Okay.
He certainly had a role to play in advising the President of the United States, but he was not an official confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So if we look at the officials that are accountable and are senior and confirmed by the United States Senate, there are many, many other officials as well in the Defense Department, in the State Department, as well as the National Security Advisor herself. And let's not forget the President of the United States,
Okay.
who ultimately makes the decision. So I don't really want to get into certain personalities. Suffice it to say that it has been almost 4 years since the Obama administration, since President Obama submitted notifications to Congress on major foreign military sales. These are government-to-government programs. It's been almost 4 years since the administration sent any of these notifications to Congress. And the last notifications that President Obama sent up to Congress were in September 2011. And right now we have pending programs, pending sales, including excess Perry-class frigates from the United States Navy, that the U.S. Navy is decommissioning, and it would save U.S. taxpayers money to transfer them to other countries. Taiwan is willing to buy 2 out of 4 that have been authorized for transfer to Taiwan. It took almost 5 years for the Navy and for other parts of the executive branch to send legislation to Congress. Then Congress considered legislation in the 112th Congress, and just recently in the 113th Congress that was completed last December. And now Congress finally passed the legislation to authorize these transfers, and now the Obama administration is not sending the notifications to Congress in order to make that sale happen.
You know, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a minute. Some people in Taiwan would say, well, you know, it's really nice of the United States to go to all that trouble to authorize the sale of those frigates to us. But you know what? We can make our own frigates. We can build our own frigates. That's something we can do. So okay, we'll take two just to, as a token, a good gesture, a token of good gesture. But, you know, we're really not too interested in those other two. But, you know, we really would like some other things from the U.S., you know, more advanced destroyers. The Kidd-class destroyers, actually, they're too big for our harbors. You've probably heard this somewhere along the line.
The Kidd-class destroyers are not too big. In fact, I've been on them, at least I've been at least on one of them. And they have been successfully refurbished at our shipyards in Charleston, South Carolina. I was at the transfer ceremonies.
Uh-huh.
They were refurbished very successfully by the United States and Taiwan's Navy, and actually ahead of schedule. And then they were transferred successfully to Taiwan. They've been integrated into Taiwan's Navy very successfully. So there's really no question about those. For the frigates, it is a matter that Taiwan needs to update its fleet of frigates, to update them from much older class, of Moss class, to the Perry class frigates. And it is really up to Taiwan. The United States does not ever force anyone else to enter into certain programs. This is something that is a mutually agreed upon decision. The United States, as I said, our language is very clear. We make certain systems available, but it is up to Taiwan to decide what it wishes to purchase and not purchase.
You know, another thing, it seems like when I talk to people in Taiwan, especially if they have some kind of a military orientation or responsibility, it was like, well, it'd be really helpful to us if you'd sell us Aegis-class destroyers. And I know you've heard that too.
To be clear, maybe about more than 10 years ago, actually, at the beginning of the Bush administration, that's George W., there was talk of transferring Aegis-equipped destroyers to Taiwan. But then we decided to transfer the excess Kidd-class destroyers first. And since then, there really has not been discussion in Taiwan about pursuing the Aegis-equipped destroyers. What Taiwan is very much focused on today is an indigenous defense submarine program.
That's a big priority, I agree. Huge priority, yeah. And they don't seem to be getting much help from anywhere, and the U.S. seems to be very ambivalent about helping Taiwan on submarines.
The trouble with the submarine program is that the United States agreed, again under George W. Bush in 2001, to help Taiwan acquire diesel-electric submarines, and we're not talking about nuclear-powered submarines, only diesel-electric submarines. And now, 14 years later, Taiwan still does not have an answer. And so it has decided to go ahead and pursue an indigenous submarine program. But it would still require some technical assistance from the United States. So I am not saying that the United States should help with that program. And I'm not saying the United States should not help. But it is overdue for the United States, for the Obama administration, to give a straight answer, first to Congress, then to U.S. industry, and then to Taiwan, about what our decision is. Do we go ahead and help Taiwan with this submarine program or not? It is overdue for a straight answer.
Good point, good point. Yeah, really good point. The Obama administration is just a little too cautious, it seems to me.
Well, there are people who would like to look at different options and different questions and different issues first before they make a decision. And certainly there are important questions to ponder. One, what would be the mission of the submarines? It is not enough for Taiwan to say, well, you know, we would like to have submarines or we want submarines. You have to be prepared to answer the questions of how the submarines would be employed, what would be the missions. It is also important to answer questions about whether this is only a program supported by a few Navy officials, or it is a program supported by the whole Ministry of National Defense and the presidential office or not, or only one party or not. It is also important to answer questions about whether the funding would be there. Because we've gone through very bad experience with Taiwan where the United States would stick our necks out to approve a certain program and Taiwan would not follow through and approve the funding. And that happened in the past with the Patriot Missile Defense Program, for example. So yes, we have certain questions and it is valid to take the time to ask those questions. But again, it's been many years since 2001 and it is still overdue for a decision, for a straight answer to Congress, US industry, and Taiwan about just what the United States plans to do.
Good. We're down to our last 3 minutes here. Let's talk about Tsai Ing-wen because she just made a rather important trip to Washington. Now, I'm not sure, were you back in Hawaii at that time or were you still in Washington when she was visiting? You were here. So what was your take on Tsai Ing-wen's visit to Washington?
I was part of a group who did meet with her on the previous round, and this was in 2011. And so I do have something to compare with.
Sure.
And based on my experience of years and meeting with her in 2011 when she was the presidential candidate, and before then she was vice premier, before that she was in the Mainland Affairs Council under Chen Shui-bian, and on and on. I am not one to say that, you know, there are certain conditions that are to be met because the United States needs to respect the democratic process of another country. And we have said this. Many officials have publicly said that we do respect the democracy and electoral process in Taiwan just as we do in any other country. So it is really not for the United States to say. I would just observe that
We're down to that 1 minute.
I would just observe that compared to 2011 when she was rather vague in the way she answered her questions and laid out her vision for how she would handle the cross-strait contacts, this time she gave much more concrete information, such as continuing the cross-strait contacts under a Republic of China constitutional framework, for example, and continuing the status quo, which is the same as what the United States would say about continuing the status quo.
Great. Well, I think we'll have to end it there. You've been watching Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. Our guest today has been Ms. Shirley Kan, who's been giving us some very valuable insight on Asian security affairs, especially as they pertain to China and Taiwan. Thank you very much for watching. Today we have another show of Asian Review, which is going to follow very shortly. We'll start that show at 4 o'clock. Our guest for that will be Ray Tsuchiyama. Next week, our regular time slot, 4 o'clock, our guest will be Ralph Kosa, President of Pacific Forum CSIS. Hope to see you at 4 o'clock and also next week. Thanks for watching.